As the autumn sun cast long shadows across the Manhattan skyline, Harrison Wells adjusted his worn leather wristwatch, a stark contrast to the collection of luxury timepieces gathering dust in his penthouse safe. The 52-year-old real estate mogul ran his fingers through his deliberately disheveled hair, examining his reflection in the restroom mirror of Grand Central Station. His custom Italian suits and designer accessories had been traded for off-the-rack jeans, scuffed work boots, and a faded flannel shirt he'd purchased from a thrift store 2 days prior. For years, Harrison had built an empire of gleaming skyscrapers and luxury developments that stretched across 3 continents, accumulating wealth beyond what most could comprehend. Something else had grown alongside his fortune, a distance between him and his only daughter, Sophia. At 23, Sophia Wells possessed her father's sharp intelligence and her late mother's striking beauty. Following her graduation from an elite business school, she had joined her father's company as expected, immediately taking to the corporate environment with a natural aptitude that impressed even the most seasoned executives. But beneath her polished exterior and professional accomplishments, Harrison sensed something troubling, an entitlement that had slowly consumed her character, transforming the once compassionate girl into someone he barely recognized. The breaking point had come during last week's board meeting when Sophia had coldly dismissed a veteran employee's concerns about community displacement resulting from their newest development project. "Collateral damage is inevitable in progress," she had stated with a clinical detachment that sent chills down Harrison's spine. Those words, so callous, so removed from humanity, had haunted him for days. They were words he recognized, words he himself might have uttered 15 years ago before circumstances had forced him to reevaluate everything. The revelation was painful. In providing Sophia with every advantage, every luxury, every connection, he had somehow failed to impart the values that truly mattered. Tonight's charade was born from that realization, a desperate attempt to reconnect with his daughter and perhaps show her a world she had never truly seen despite living among its towering monuments of wealth and privilege. Harrison had orchestrated everything meticulously. Sophia believed she was meeting her father for their monthly dinner at Le Bernardin. Instead, a message from his assistant had redirected her to meet at a small diner in a working-class neighborhood in Queens. He would arrive first, not as the powerful CEO she knew, but as a struggling blue-collar worker with a story to tell. The deception troubled him, but desperation had overridden his usual straightforward approach. As Harrison left the station and hailed a taxi, he rehearsed his cover story once more, ignoring the buzzing of his silenced phone. For tonight, Harrison Wells, CEO of Wells International Development, would cease to exist. In his place would be Harry, a construction worker struggling to make ends meet, but hoping to reconnect with his estranged daughter over a simple meal he could barely afford. The taxi wound through the congested streets of Midtown, eventually crossing the Queensboro Bridge. As the Manhattan skyline receded in the distance, Harrison felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in decades, no one expected anything from him. No decisions needed making, no crises needed averting, no deals needed closing. The anonymity was strangely liberating. The cab pulled up before a modest corner establishment with a flickering neon sign that read Rose's Diner. Harrison paid the fare with carefully counted bills from his worn wallet, adding a generous tip that the driver accepted with genuine gratitude, a small interaction that already felt more authentic than many of his high-stakes business transactions. Through the large windows, he could see booths filled with families, couples, and solitary diners hunched over plates of hearty food. No white tablecloths, no sommelier, no maitre d' discreetly scanning for designer labels and renowned faces. Just people sharing meals and conversation without pretense or performance. Harrison checked his watch again. Sophia would arrive in approximately 20 minutes if she stayed true to her punctual nature. He entered the diner, the bell above the door announcing his arrival with a cheerful jingle that no one bothered to acknowledge. The air was thick with the aroma of coffee, grilled onions, and freshly baked pie, comforting smells that triggered unexpected memories of his own childhood before wealth had insulated him from such ordinary experiences. He selected a booth near the back with a clear view of the entrance and settled into the cracked vinyl seat. A middle-aged waitress approached, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners as she offered a genuine smile. "Coffee to start?" she asked, already pouring before he could respond, the practiced movement speaking to years of anticipating customers' needs. Harrison nodded gratefully, wrapping his hands around the mug, appreciating the warmth seeping into his fingers. The simple pleasure reminded him of earlier days, before assistants ensured his preferred artisanal blend was prepared at precisely the right temperature each morning. He scanned the laminated menu, mentally calculating the cost of each item against the limited cash in his wallet, a budgeting exercise he hadn't performed in decades. The bell jingled again, and Harrison's heart skipped as Sophia entered, her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair immediately marking her as out of place in the humble establishment. She stood in the entrance, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation as she scanned the diner. When her eyes landed on him, her brow furrowed deeper, not with recognition, but with growing frustration at the apparent absence of her father. Harrison realized with a pang that his disguise was perhaps more effective than anticipated. His own daughter was looking right through him. He raised his hand slightly, catching her attention. Sophia approached cautiously, her stiletto heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor, drawing curious glances from other patrons. "Excuse me," she began frostily, "I'm supposed to be meeting someone here, and this table is." Harrison cleared his throat. "Sophia," he said quietly, allowing his natural voice to emerge from beneath the affected working-class accent he had practiced. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with suspicion as she took in his appearance. "Dad? What is this? What are you wearing? Are you filming something?" She glanced around as if searching for hidden cameras, unable to comprehend the transformation before her. "Please, sit down," Harrison gestured to the seat across from him. "I'll explain everything." Reluctantly, Sophia slid into the booth, placing her designer handbag beside her with exaggerated care, as though afraid it might become contaminated by its surroundings. She folded her arms defensively across her chest. "Is this some kind of bizarre test? Or have you completely lost your mind?" The waitress approached before Harrison could respond, refilling his coffee and turning to Sophia with the same genuine smile she had offered him. "What can I get you, honey?" Sophia's gaze flickered over the waitress with barely concealed disdain. "Just water, please. Bottled, not tap." The coldness in her tone made Harrison wince, but the waitress merely nodded and moved away, unfazed by the rudeness she likely encountered regularly. "Sophia," Harrison began carefully, "I want you to meet someone tonight. Someone you've never truly known, despite sharing his DNA." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Tonight, I'm not Harrison Wells, CEO. I'm just Harry, a construction worker who's been trying to make ends meet since losing his job during the recession. I've been working odd jobs, barely keeping up with rent, and I saved for weeks to have dinner with my daughter tonight." Sophia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose incrementally. "And the purpose of this charade?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "For one evening, I want us to be just father and daughter, not boss and employee, not millionaire and heiress. Just two people reconnecting without the buffer of privilege." He gestured around the diner. "And I want you to experience a different reality than the one you're accustomed to." A flash of anger crossed Sophia's face. So this is about teaching me some kind of lesson. Making me feel guilty for the life you provided. Her voice had risen slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. This isn't about guilt, Harrison replied calmly. It's about perspective. For tonight, can you just play along? Can you be Sophia, daughter of Harry the construction worker, who struggles to pay his bills, but wanted to spend time with his only child more than anything? Sophia's jaw clenched as she considered his request, her eyes darting toward the exit as she weighed the option of simply walking out. Finally, her shoulders dropped slightly. 1 hour, she conceded. But this is bizarre and, frankly, beneath both of us. Harrison felt a flicker of hope as the waitress returned with Sophia's water and a notepad for their orders. Ready to order, folks? Harry smiled warmly at the waitress, whose name tag read Doris. I think I'll have the meatloaf special, he said, deliberately selecting one of the less expensive menu items. Doris nodded approvingly. Good choice. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Best comfort food in Queens. She turned expectantly to Sophia, who was still scrutinizing the menu with thinly veiled dismay. Do you have anything organic? Sophia asked. Or perhaps a salad that isn't drowning in dressing? Doris tapped her pen against the notepad. Honey, what you see is what we serve. Chef makes a mean salad, but I wouldn't call it fancy. House dressing comes on the side if you'd prefer. Reluctantly, Sophia ordered the house salad with grilled chicken, requesting several modifications that Doris recorded with remarkable patience. As the waitress walked away, Harrison leaned forward, fully embracing his role. So, how's work been? He asked, his voice roughened slightly to match his appearance. Construction's been slow these past months. Barely getting by with the odd jobs I can pick up. Sophia glanced around nervously, as if concerned someone might overhear their fictional conversation. But seeing the earnestness in her father's eyes, she sighed and tentatively entered the charade. Work is challenging, she replied, choosing her words carefully. My boss has very high expectations. I bet, Harrison nodded sympathetically. Those corporate types can be demanding. Never satisfied no matter how hard you work. He watched a flash of recognition cross Sophia's face. Had she heard similar comments from employees about him, or perhaps about herself? But that's the way it is, he continued. Some people are born into opportunity, others have to scratch and claw for every inch. The simple statement hung between them, loaded with implications that neither fully acknowledged. Their conversation was interrupted as a commotion erupted near the front of the diner. A disheveled man had entered and was arguing loudly with the host about being allowed to stay despite not ordering anything substantial. Just a coffee, man, the stranger insisted, his words slightly slurred. It's starting to rain out there. Harrison observed the interaction with interest, noting how the staff handled the situation with firm but compassionate boundaries, eventually allowing the man to sit at the counter with a cup of coffee. Such scenes never unfolded in the exclusive restaurants Harrison typically frequented, where invisible systems ensured that undesirable elements remained firmly outside. Sophia had also been watching, her expression a mixture of discomfort and fascination. Does that happen often in places like this? She asked quietly, the pretense momentarily forgotten. Life happens in places like this, Harrison replied. Real, unfiltered, messy life. Before Sophia could respond, Doris returned with their meals, setting down Harrison's meatloaf special with a flourish. Best in the borough, she proclaimed proudly. Sophia's salad followed, surprisingly fresh and generously portioned despite her earlier skepticism. Harrison bowed his head briefly in a silent grace, something he hadn't done in years, before cutting into his meatloaf. The first bite transported him back to childhood Sunday dinners, to simpler times before wealth had complicated every aspect of his existence. "This is delicious," he said sincerely, not needing to act his enjoyment. Sophia picked at her salad cautiously before taking a proper bite. Surprise flickered across her features. "It's actually quite good," she admitted reluctantly. "The chicken is perfectly cooked." As they ate, Harrison gradually steered the conversation toward more personal territories, asking about Sophia's dreams and concerns in ways he rarely had time for during their usual hurried dinners or formal company meetings. Freed from the constraints of their real identities, Sophia began to open up, sharing frustrations about colleagues and insecurities about her rapid ascent within the company that she'd never voiced before. "Sometimes I wonder if people respect me or just fear crossing the boss's daughter," she confessed, vulnerability breaking through her polished exterior. "I hear the whispers when I walk into rooms, see the way conversations stop." Harrison felt a pang of recognition. How many times had he dismissed similar concerns when she'd hinted at them in the past? Always quick with reassurances about her competence, but never truly acknowledging the unique challenges her position created. "That must be difficult," he said now, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Never knowing if you've truly earned your place." Something shifted in Sophia's expression at his genuine understanding. For a moment, she wasn't performing for the heir to a corporate empire, she was simply a young woman confiding in her father. The front door jingled again, and an elderly couple entered, moving slowly toward a booth near them. The woman walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on her husband's arm. Sophia watched them settle into their seats, the man attending to his wife with tender care, helping her remove her coat and ensuring she was comfortable before taking his own seat. "They come in every Thursday," Doris mentioned as she refilled Harrison's coffee. "Married 57 years. He still looks at her like she hung the moon." Sophia's gaze lingered on the couple, her expression softening. "That's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. As they continued their meal, Harrison noticed Sophia becoming increasingly engaged with their surroundings, her initial disdain gradually replaced by genuine curiosity. She observed the interactions between regular customers and staff, the easy camaraderie that money couldn't purchase, the authentic connections formed in this humble space. When Doris brought their check, Harrison made a show of carefully counting out bills from his worn wallet, leaving a modest but appropriate tip. Sophia watched this ritual so different from her father's usual careless signing of receipts, without glancing at totals with growing understanding. They were preparing to leave when a young woman burst through the door, clearly distressed, a small child clutching her hand. "Doris," she called across the diner, "is Frank here? The car broke down again, and I can't make it to the hospital. Mom's taken a turn for the worse." The waitress immediately mobilized, calling to the cook who emerged from the kitchen, already wiping his hands and reaching for his keys. Within moments, the entire diner had rallied around the young mother, offers of rides, childcare, and casseroles flowing freely from people who clearly had little to spare themselves. Harrison and Sophia sat transfixed by this spontaneous community response, this natural human connection that required no corporate team-building exercises or scheduled philanthropy to manifest. As they finally stepped outside, the contrast between the warm diner and the cool night air mirrored the stark differences between the world they had temporarily inhabited and the rarefied environment to which they would return. For several moments, they walked in silence, Sophia's heels clicking against the sidewalk, as they made their way toward the subway station, Harrison having insisted they complete the experience by taking public transportation rather than calling a car service. Why did you really bring me here tonight? Sophia finally asked, her voice quiet but steady. Harrison considered the question carefully before answering. Do you remember Mrs. Peterson? He asked. Sophia's brow furrowed. Your first assistant. The one who retired maybe 15 years ago. Harrison nodded. Before she worked for me, before I could afford an assistant, she was my neighbor. I was struggling to make rent, working 3 jobs, barely sleeping. When your mother got sick the first time, Mrs. Peterson watched you for free while I took extra shifts to pay the medical bills. He paused, memories washing over him. One night, I came home to find you sound asleep and a casserole in the oven. Mrs. Peterson had used her own grocery money to make sure we had a proper meal. Sophia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. You never told me that story. There's a lot I never told you, Harrison admitted. About the years before Wells International, before the success. I wanted to protect you from that struggle, that uncertainty. But in doing so, I think I deprived you of understanding what truly matters. He gestured back toward the diner. What we just witnessed in there, that community, that genuine human connection, that's what built me before money ever did. And I've failed to show you that part of life. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. So this was about showing me how the other half lives. A poverty tourism expedition to make me appreciate my privilege. There was an edge to her voice, but also genuine confusion. No, Harrison shook his head firmly. This was about showing you that connection transcends circumstance. That dignity exists independent of bank accounts. That the measure of a person isn't in what they own, but in how they treat others, especially those who can do nothing for them in return. They had reached the subway entrance, and Harrison paused before descending the stairs. The truth is, Sophia, I've been watching you become someone I don't recognize. Someone more concerned with status than substance. And I realized with horror that it's exactly who I trained you to be, perhaps who I've been myself for too long. Sophia's defenses visibly crumbled, tears welling in her eyes. You think I'm heartless, she whispered. You think I don't care about people. Harrison reached for her hands, holding them tightly in his own. I think you haven't been given the opportunity to care about people outside our bubble. I think you've been taught that success is measured in dollars and influence rather than impact and connection. And that's my failure as a father. As they stood there, a homeless man approached, asking for spare change. Without hesitation, Sophia opened her designer purse and pulled out all the cash, she had far more than the typical donation, and handed it to the surprised man with a gentle smile. For a hot meal and a safe place tonight, she said softly. Harrison watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and hope. Perhaps the evening had affected her more deeply than he'd dared to hope. They descended into the subway station, purchasing Metro cards and navigating the unfamiliar system together. As they waited on the platform among the diverse crowd of evening commuters, Sophia leaned against her father's shoulder, a gesture of affection she hadn't initiated in years. I've been thinking about the community center proposal, she said quietly, referring to a recent project she had vehemently opposed during board discussions due to its impact on profit margins. Maybe we should revisit it with a different perspective. There are ways we could make it work without compromising the development entirely. Harrison felt his heart swell with unexpected emotion. I'd like that very much, he replied simply. The train arrived with a rush of wind and screeching brakes, opening its doors to accept the waiting passengers. As they stepped aboard together, the disguised billionaire and his corporate heiress daughter, Harrison realized that the greatest wealth he possessed was not in his extensive portfolio or his landmark developments, but in this moment of genuine connection with his child. And perhaps, in the artificial poverty of this one evening, they had both discovered a richness that had been missing from their abundant lives for far too long. The train lurched forward, carrying them back toward Manhattan's glittering skyline, but Harrison knew that something fundamental had shifted. The journey back to their world of privilege would be the same distance in miles, but immeasurable in understanding gained. As the city lights grew brighter through the train windows, Sophia's hand found his, squeezing gently. No words were necessary. The gesture contained all the acknowledgement and promise that Harrison had hoped for when he had conceived this unusual evening. Tomorrow, they would return to their roles as CEO and executive, but tonight had laid the foundation for something more important, a father and daughter rediscovering what it meant to truly see one another, and perhaps, in that seeing, to become better versions of themselves. As the subway rumbled beneath the city, carrying its disparate passengers toward their various destinations, Harrison and Sophia Wells sat in comfortable silence, each contemplating how a single evening of pretend poverty had paradoxically enriched them beyond measure. The impact of their unconventional evening reverberated through the following weeks in subtle but unmistakable ways. Harrison observed Sophia with newfound attention, noting small changes in her interactions with employees across all levels of the company. Where she had once swept through the offices with brisk efficiency, eyes forward and expression guarded, she now paused for genuine conversations, learning names and circumstances, listening with authentic interest rather than performative attention. The transformation was perhaps most evident during the next board meeting, when the community center proposal resurfaced for discussion. Sophia had spent the intervening weeks thoroughly revising the project, conducting site visits and community consultations that had traditionally been delegated to junior staff. She presented her findings with an eloquence born of genuine conviction, outlining a modified plan that would preserve the essential community benefits while implementing creative adjustments to maintain reasonable profitability. "The numbers will tell you this reduces our projected return by 7%, she acknowledged to the assembled board members, who shifted uncomfortably at this unwelcome information. What the numbers can't quantify is the long-term value of community goodwill, the economic benefits of local workforce development, and the ethical imperative of responsible corporate citizenship." Harrison watched with barely concealed pride as his daughter defended her position with the same fierce intelligence she had always possessed, but now tempered with a compassion that rendered her arguments more rather than less compelling. When a particularly skeptical board member challenged her revised projections, suggesting that Wells International wasn't in the charity business, Sophia countered with unexpected humility. "6 weeks ago, I would have made the exact same argument," she admitted candidly. "But I've come to believe that sustainability isn't just about environmental impact, it's about human impact as well. A development that enriches our bottom line while depleting community resources isn't truly successful by any meaningful metric." Her words hung in the air, challenging decades of corporate orthodoxy. Harrison allowed the silence to stretch, observing how his daughter stood her ground with quiet confidence rather than defensive aggression. When he finally spoke, lending his authority to her position, he noted the relief in her eyes, not at being rescued, but at being supported as she charted this new territory. The board ultimately approved the revised proposal, though several members registered their reservations. As the meeting adjourned, Harrison overheard a veteran executive murmuring to a colleague, "The Wells girl is turning out to be more than just a pretty face with a famous last name. There's substance there I didn't expect." The comment, not intended for his ears, confirmed what Harrison had begun to suspect. Their evening of pretend poverty had accomplished what years of privileged mentoring had not. It had given Sophia the one thing her affluence had never provided: perspective. The transformation extended beyond the corporate boardroom, permeating every aspect of Sophia's life in ways that continually surprised her father. Harrison first noticed it in her penthouse apartment, which had once been a showpiece of modern luxury, curated by high-end designers and featured in architectural magazines. When he visited for dinner one evening, he was struck by subtle changes that signaled profound shifts in priorities. The sterile minimalism had been softened with elements that spoke of genuine living rather than performative display, handcrafted pottery purchased from street vendors, vibrant textiles from local artisans, and most surprisingly, framed photographs of people Harrison didn't recognize. "Who are these?" he asked, studying an image of Sophia laughing alongside a group of women of various ages, all wearing aprons spattered with paint. Sophia handed him a glass of wine, her expression softening as she glanced at the photograph. "My art therapy group at the women's shelter," she explained. "We meet every Tuesday evening. That was taken after we completed a mural in the children's playroom." She pointed to another frame, where a striking abstract painting in bold colors commanded attention. "And that was created by Marissa, a single mother of 3 who fled domestic violence with nothing but the clothes on her back. She's discovered a remarkable talent for abstract expressionism." Harrison studied the artwork with genuine appreciation, noting the raw emotion captured in each brushstroke. "It's extraordinary," he acknowledged. "Have you spoken with her about gallery representation? This quality of work deserves a wider audience." Something flickered across Sophia's face, a protective instinct that Harrison had never seen directed toward anyone outside their immediate circle. "Marissa isn't ready for that kind of exposure," she said carefully. "Her ex-husband is still searching for her. Anonymity is her safety net right now." She ran her fingers along the frame thoughtfully. "But I've been speaking with several gallery owners about hosting an anonymous exhibition of works from shelter residents. All proceeds would go directly to the artists, creating a financial foundation for their fresh starts." Harrison's chest tightened with emotion he couldn't fully articulate: pride, certainly, but something deeper as well. The daughter who had once evaluated every interaction through the lens of potential business advantage was now wielding her considerable influence to protect and elevate those without voices in the powerful circles she inhabited. "That's a remarkable initiative," he said simply, knowing that more effusive praise would only embarrass her. Sophia shrugged, a gesture that attempted casualness, but couldn't quite conceal the passion underlying her words. "These women have overcome obstacles I can scarcely imagine. Their resilience deserves recognition and support." She led him to the dining area, where a mismatched collection of handmade ceramic dishes replaced the designer tableware that had previously graced her table. "From the community pottery studio in Queens," she explained, noticing his questioning glance. "I've been taking classes there on Thursday evenings. It turns out I have a deplorable lack of artistic talent, but the process is surprisingly therapeutic." Harrison laughed, reaching for a slightly lopsided bowl with endearing imperfection. "Your mother was the same way, desperately artistic in spirit, but cursed with 2 left hands when it came to execution." The mention of Eleanor Wells, gone now for 15 years, brought the expected pang, but also a warm current of shared memory that had been absent from their relationship for too long. "Tell me about her," Sophia requested softly, placing a serving dish of fragrant paella on the table, another surprise, as Sophia had never shown interest in cooking before. "Not the successful interior designer everyone talks about, but the woman you first met. The one before wealth changed everything." Harrison settled into a chair, momentarily transported to another time, to a cramped walk-up apartment with peeling paint and persistent drafts. Where a spirited young woman with paint-stained fingers and dreams larger than their bank account had captivated him with her vision of beauty amid scarcity. "She could transform any space with almost nothing," he began, the memories flowing more freely than they had in years. "We could barely afford rent, but Eleanor would bring home discarded items from construction sites, abandoned furniture from curbs, damaged goods from thrift stores, things most people overlooked or dismissed. She had this extraordinary ability to see potential where others saw only flaws. Sophia listened intently, serving the paella with careful attention that suggested the meal represented more than mere sustenance. The first apartment we shared had exposed pipes that the landlord refused to fix, Harrison continued, his voice warm with recollection. Most people would have complained or tried to hide them. Your mother painted them in metallic copper and integrated them into an industrial design concept that made our shabby apartment feel intentional, avant-garde even. He smiled, tasting the paella with appreciative surprise, the flavors complex and well-balanced, suggesting hours of preparation. This is excellent, he commented. When did you learn to cook like this? Sophia's cheeks colored slightly with pleasure at the compliment. Doris introduced me to her nephew Miguel. He runs a community cooking class in the church basement near the diner. Mostly immigrants teaching traditional family recipes. She gestured to the dish between them. This is Carmen's recipe. She's from Valencia and insists that authentic paella requires no seafood, only rabbit and chicken. She practically disowned me when I suggested adding shrimp. They shared a comfortable laugh, and Harrison marveled at how naturally it came, this easy companionship that had eluded them for so long despite their biological connection. You've been busy, he observed, the simple statement encompassing the multitude of changes evident in every aspect of his daughter's transformed life. Sophia considered this as she refilled their glasses. I've been living, she corrected gently. 4 years, I've been performing, executing the role of Harrison Wells' daughter, an heir with impeccable precision, but missing the substance beneath the surface. She met his gaze directly, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended her 23 years. That night at the diner, watching that community rally around the young mother in crisis, it haunted me. I kept wondering who would rally around me in a real crisis, not because of what I could offer in return, but simply because they cared. The question hung between them, potent and profound. Harrison reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. I would, he said simply. Not because you're my heir or because you carry the Wells name, but because you're Sophia, complex, evolving, imperfect, and extraordinary. She turned her hand beneath his, returning the pressure with gentle acknowledgement. I know that now, she replied. But I'm not sure I would have believed it 6 months ago. The admission carried no accusation, just honest recognition of the distance that had grown between them, a chasm of privilege and performance that had nearly claimed their authentic connection. The meal progressed with easy conversation, punctuated by laughter and occasional comfortable silences. As Harrison prepared to leave, Sophia handed him a carefully wrapped package. For your birthday next week, she explained. I know we are supposed to have dinner at La Grenouille, but I was hoping you might consider an alternative. Harrison accepted the gift with curiosity. What did you have in mind? There's a community dinner at the shelter, Sophia said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice for the first time that evening. Nothing fancy, potluck style, with music from local musicians. The women would love to meet you. She hesitated, then added, the real you, not Harry the construction worker. The invitation represented something profound. Sophia wasn't merely participating in community service. As a dilettante's hobby, she had integrated these people into her concept of family, her circle of belonging. I'd be honored, Harrison replied sincerely. In the elevator descending from Sophia's penthouse, Harrison carefully unwrapped her gift. Inside the recycled paper packaging, he found a handcrafted leather journal with his initials embossed on the cover. Opening to the first page, he discovered Sophia's elegant handwriting, For the stories that shaped you before I knew you, the ones I'm finally ready to hear. With love from your daughter, who is learning to truly see. Tears pricked unexpectedly at Harrison's eyes as the elevator doors opened to the opulent lobby of the luxury building. He nodded absently to the doorman as he stepped into the cool evening air, the journal clutched against his chest like something precious salvaged from a fire. The magnitude of the transformation struck him with sudden clarity, how a single evening of uncomfortable truth had redirected the trajectory of his daughter's life, and, by extension, his own. Outside the professional realm, changes manifested in their personal relationship as well. Their monthly formal dinners evolved into weekly casual meals, sometimes at modest establishments they would never have considered before. During these less structured encounters, they spoke more frankly than they had in years, peeling back layers of practiced distance to rediscover the genuine affection that had been obscured but never entirely lost. During one such dinner, at a family-owned Italian restaurant where the owner greeted regular customers with effusive hugs, Sophia revealed something that stunned her father into momentary silence. "I've been volunteering," she said casually, twirling pasta around her fork. "At a women's shelter in Brooklyn. Just a few hours on weekends, helping with resume writing and interview preparation." Harrison set down his glass, studying his daughter's face. "That's wonderful," he managed finally. "How did that come about?" Sophia's smile held a hint of mischief. "Remember Doris? From the diner? I went back the following week alone and we got to talking. Turns out her sister runs the shelter." One thing led to another. She shrugged as if this dramatic departure from her previous lifestyle was the most natural progression imaginable. "The women there have taught me more about resilience and ingenuity than any business school case study ever could." Harrison shook his head in wonderment. "You went back to the diner," he repeated, the simple act representing a monumental shift in her willingness to step outside her comfort zone. "I did," Sophia confirmed. "And not just once. I've become something of a regular. The meatloaf really is exceptional." She laughed at his expression. "Don't look so shocked, Dad. You wanted to teach me a lesson, remember? Consider it learned perhaps more thoroughly than you anticipated." The shelter's community dinner represented everything a traditional Wells social event was not: gloriously chaotic, unapologetically emotional, and stripped of pretense. Fluorescent lighting illuminated the church basement, where mismatched tables had been arranged in a rough approximation of a dining hall. Paper streamers and children's artwork provided the only decoration, yet the atmosphere hummed with an authenticity that the most exclusive Manhattan venues could never replicate. Harrison arrived precisely on time, bearing the homemade lasagna Sophia had requested, his mother's recipe, untouched for decades until he had spent the previous evening wrestling with ricotta and remembering how Eleanor had taught him to layer the pasta just so. He stood uncertainly in the entrance, the unfamiliar vulnerability of not knowing protocols or expectations washing over him. Before he could retreat to safer emotional territory, Sophia appeared at his side, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, yet somehow more radiant than he'd ever seen her in designer gowns. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "And you brought Grandma's lasagna." She kissed his cheek, taking the heavy dish from his hands. "Come meet everyone." What followed was unlike any social experience in Harrison's considerable memory. Sophia led him through the room, making introductions with genuine warmth that was returned tenfold. There was Marissa of the extraordinary abstract paintings, her dark eyes watchful but gradually warming as Harrison discussed her artistic influences without a hint of condescension. There was Carmen of the authentic paella, who seized his lasagna with good-natured skepticism, declaring that Italian cuisine was merely adequate compared to Spanish culinary traditions. Children wove between adults, unrestrained by the strict behavioral codes that had governed Sophia's childhood social appearances. Harrison found himself drawn into conversations about neighborhood zoning disputes, school board politics, and the ongoing battle to secure funding for after-school programs. No one asked about stock portfolios or real estate trends. No one sought investment advice or business connections. He was valued for his attention and engagement rather than his financial influence, a novel experience that he found surprisingly refreshing. Midway through the evening, a small commotion near the entrance drew collective attention. An elderly woman had arrived, moving slowly with the assistance of a middle-aged daughter. "Miss Gladys." Several voices called in greeting. Harrison watched as Sophia immediately abandoned her conversation to assist the newcomer, guiding her to a seat of honor at a central table. He nodded absently to the doorman as he stepped into the cool evening air, the journal clutched against his chest like something precious salvaged from a fire. The magnitude of the transformation struck him with sudden clarity, how a single evening of uncomfortable truth had redirected the trajectory of his daughter's life, and, by extension, his own. Outside the professional realm, changes manifested in their personal relationship as well. Their monthly formal dinners evolved into weekly casual meals, sometimes at modest establishments they would never have considered before. During these less structured encounters, they spoke more frankly than they had in years, peeling back layers of practiced distance to rediscover the genuine affection that had been obscured but never entirely lost. During one such dinner, at a family-owned Italian restaurant where the owner greeted regular customers with effusive hugs, Sophia revealed something that stunned her father into momentary silence. "I've been volunteering," she said casually, twirling pasta around her fork, "at a women's shelter in Brooklyn. Just a few hours on weekends, helping with resume writing and interview preparation." Harrison set down his glass, studying his daughter's face. "That's wonderful," he managed finally. "How did that come about?" Sophia's smile held a hint of mischief. "Remember Doris from the diner? I went back the following week alone and we got to talking. Turns out her sister runs the shelter. One thing led to another." She shrugged as if this dramatic departure from her previous lifestyle was the most natural progression imaginable. "The women there have taught me more about resilience and ingenuity than any business school case study ever could." Harrison shook his head in wonderment. "You went back to the diner," he repeated, the simple act representing a monumental shift in her willingness to step outside her comfort zone. "I did," Sophia confirmed. "And not just once. I've become something of a regular. The meatloaf really is exceptional." She laughed at his expression. "Don't look so shocked, Dad. You wanted to teach me a lesson, remember? Consider it learned perhaps more thoroughly than you anticipated." The shelter's community dinner represented everything a traditional Wells social event was not: gloriously chaotic, unapologetically emotional, and stripped of pretense. Fluorescent lighting illuminated the church basement, where mismatched tables had been arranged in a rough approximation of a dining hall. Paper streamers and children's artwork provided the only decoration, yet the atmosphere hummed with an authenticity that the most exclusive Manhattan venues could never replicate. Harrison arrived precisely on time, bearing the homemade lasagna Sophia had requested, his mother's recipe, untouched for decades until he had spent the previous evening wrestling with ricotta and remembering how Eleanor had taught him to layer the pasta just so. He stood uncertainly in the entrance, the unfamiliar vulnerability of not knowing protocols or expectations washing over him. Before he could retreat to safer emotional territory, Sophia appeared at his side, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, yet somehow more radiant than he'd ever seen her in designer gowns. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "And you brought Grandma's lasagna." She kissed his cheek, taking the heavy dish from his hands. "Come meet everyone." What followed was unlike any social experience in Harrison's considerable memory. Sophia led him through the room, making introductions with genuine warmth that was returned tenfold. There was Marissa of the extraordinary abstract paintings, her dark eyes watchful, but gradually warming as Harrison discussed her artistic influences without a hint of condescension. There was Carmen of the authentic paella, who seized his lasagna with good-natured skepticism, declaring that Italian cuisine was merely adequate compared to Spanish culinary traditions. Children wove between adults, unrestrained by the strict behavioral codes that had governed Sophia's childhood social appearances. Harrison found himself drawn into conversations about neighborhood zoning disputes, school board politics, and the ongoing battle to secure funding for after-school programs. No one asked about stock portfolios or real estate trends. No one sought investment advice or business connections. He was valued for his attention and engagement rather than his financial influence, a novel experience that he found surprisingly refreshing. Midway through the evening, a small commotion near the entrance drew collective attention. An elderly woman had arrived, moving slowly with the assistance of a middle-aged daughter. "Miss Gladys." Several voices called in greeting. Harrison watched as Sophia immediately abandoned her conversation to assist the newcomer, guiding her to a seat of honor at a central table. The realization must have shown on his face because Sophia nodded slightly, confirming his unspoken recognition. "I only discovered the connection last week while reviewing the organizational charts," she continued quietly. "I haven't told her." The implicit question hung between them: what would he do with this information? What action would follow this uncomfortable awareness? Harrison distributed dessert plates mechanically, his mind racing through potential approaches to the situation. The corporate structure had been deliberately designed to create plausible deniability and legal distance. Unwinding such arrangements would trigger shareholder objections, board resistance, and potentially significant financial penalties. Yet as he watched Miss Gladys holding court among the children, her dignified presence a living embodiment of community continuity, the elaborate justifications for predatory business practices seemed increasingly indefensible. "Let me look into it," he told Sophia finally. "There may be ways to intervene without drawing direct connections." She studied his face intently, searching for sincerity versus expedient appeasement. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded once, decisively. "Thank you," she said simply. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, laughter, and unexpected moments of connection. Harrison found himself engaged in a spirited chess match with a 14-year-old boy whose strategic thinking rivaled graduates from the elite business schools Wells International typically recruited from. He discussed urban gardening innovations with a former accountant who had lost everything to medical bankruptcy following her husband's prolonged illness. He learned about neighborhood initiatives to create safe passages for children walking to school in high-crime areas, tenant organizing strategies against negligent landlords, and community-based approaches to elder care that put his own expensive arrangements for his aging mother to shame. Throughout it all, he observed Sophia moving through the gathering with natural grace and genuine connection, remembering names, following up on previous conversations, celebrating small victories, and offering comfort for setbacks. When Harrison had first conceived the poor date experiment, he had hoped to spark some recognition in his daughter of the humanity that existed beyond their privileged bubble. Never had he anticipated that she would not merely observe this alternative reality, but would immerse herself within it, finding community and purpose that their wealth had never provided. As the evening wound down, Harrison found himself helping with cleanup alongside other attendees, scraping plates, and washing dishes with unaccustomed diligence. Doris from the diner appeared at his elbow, passing him another stack of dirty dishes with a knowing smile. "So you're the famous father," she remarked, her tone suggesting Sophia had shared at least some portion of their unconventional evening months earlier. Harrison nodded, accepting both the dishes and the implicit assessment. "I am," he acknowledged, waiting for judgment or perhaps conditional approval. Instead, Doris surprised him with a hearty laugh. "That was either the craziest or the smartest parenting move I've ever heard of," she declared, her forthright manner refreshingly direct after decades navigating the carefully coded communications of corporate culture. "Guess it depends on the results, and from where I'm standing, you did all right." She nodded toward Sophia, who was across the room helping an elderly gentleman into his coat. "That girl of yours, she's the real deal. Shows up consistently, listens more than she talks, and actually follows through on what she promises. Rare qualities these days, especially from folks who don't need anything from anybody." The simple assessment, delivered without flattery or agenda, affected Harrison more deeply than the most elaborate praise from business publications or industry accolades. "She gets that from her mother," he said quietly. Doris shrugged, unimpressed by his modesty. "Maybe so, but someone must have watered those seeds along the way." She picked up a tray of clean glasses. "Now make yourself useful and dry those dishes. Even millionaires need to earn their keep around here." Harrison laughed, accepting the dish towel she thrust into his hands. As he worked alongside volunteers from all walks of life, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a single manipulative dinner date and had somehow evolved into authentic transformation for both himself and his daughter. As their relationship deepened and Sophia's worldview expanded, Harrison found himself reflecting on his own journey and the circumstances that had originally taught him the value of community and connection. In a gesture that surprised even himself, he established a substantial scholarship fund at his former community college, specifically targeting students facing economic hardship similar to what he had experienced before his financial breakthrough. The announcement made no mention of Harrison Wells. The endowment was attributed simply to a former student who remembers what it means to struggle. The anonymity of the gift provided a satisfaction unlike any he had experienced from the many high-profile donations that had previously adorned buildings with the Wells name. 6 months after their transformative dinner, Harrison and Sophia embarked on another unconventional outing, this time with mutual awareness and intention. They volunteered together at a community kitchen, donning aprons and hairnets alongside regular volunteers to serve meals to those experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. The work was physically demanding in ways neither was accustomed to: hours of standing, lifting heavy trays, navigating the controlled chaos of a busy service operation. Yet by day's end, as they sat exhausted but fulfilled at a corner table, sharing coffee with the volunteer coordinator, Harrison felt a connection with his daughter that transcended their shared DNA or corporate legacy. They had built something more meaningful together, a bridge between their privileged reality and a deeper understanding of humanity in all its complexity. The volunteer coordinator, unaware of their true identities, thanked them warmly for their help. "Will we see you again next month?" she asked hopefully. Harrison glanced at Sophia, leaving the decision to her. His daughter smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture reminiscent of her childhood that touched something profound in his heart. "Absolutely," she confirmed. "We've discovered it's important to remember what really matters." As they walked back to the car that would return them to their world of luxury and influence, Sophia linked her arm through her father's. "You know," she said thoughtfully, That evening when you pretended to be poor, it was manipulative and somewhat condescending. Harrison winced, but she continued before he could apologize. And it was exactly what I needed. She squeezed his arm affectionately. Thank you for caring enough to shake up my world, even when it meant risking my anger. Harrison covered her hand with his own, throat tight with emotion. Parenthood is filled with imperfect attempts to do the right thing, he acknowledged. I'm just grateful this particular gamble paid off. Sophia laughed softly. The great Harrison Wells, admitting to imperfection. Perhaps we've both been transformed. As they reached the car, Harrison paused, struck by a sudden thought. What do you say we skip the car and take the subway instead? He suggested impulsively. For old time's sake. Sophia's smile widened as she released his arm and gestured toward the nearest station entrance. Lead the way, Harry, she teased, referencing his alter ego from that fateful night. This time, I promise not to complain about the seats or the smell. Together, father and daughter descended into the subway system, joining the diverse flow of humanity that coursed beneath the city streets. No longer observers pretending to participate in a different reality, they moved through the world with newfound awareness, privileged still, powerful still, but carrying within them the understanding that true wealth resided not in what they possessed, but in how they connected, how they contributed, and how they cared for those whose paths intersected with their own, however briefly, in the complex tapestry of human experience.